A few words about Father Antonelli and his ordination to the cardinalate. It's the custom of the new cardinals, if they can possibly buy either the apartment that belonged to a previous cardinal or a former cardinal, or the furniture, or both. And this is what Cardinal Antonelli did. He bought both the apartment, which was over in the Trastevere section of Rome, that is across the Tiber, and he bought both the apartment and the furnishings, and it was absolutely a beautiful place with a lovely promenade outside on the top of the building where you could see the entire city of Rome. He had as a housekeeper a very efficient missionary, and she was a very good cook. It was one of the highlights of any central council meeting in those days to be invited to go to a dinner at Cardinal Antonelli's. You could always be assured of the finest cooking and some of the nicest wine I have ever tasted. It was truly one of the highlights of the meeting, if you have a highlight other than the meeting itself. When Cardinal Antonelli became a cardinal, he asked Father Norcini, who's also a friar, and from, I believe, the same province as Cardinal Antonelli, to take over the Italian zone. Or actually, it was not a zone at that point, but to take over the Italian part of the institute. And Father Norcini was a young friar, and at one of the meetings, he had the room next to Sue Ann and myself. And one night, we heard this commotion out in the hall, and we went out to see what was going on. And there was Father Norcini standing in a pair of pajamas, the brightest blue I've ever seen, and he couldn't turn the water off in his bathroom. We finally helped him to do it, and then we were able to call the good nuns so that they could come and really get it fixed. But every time either Sue Ann or I thinks of Father Norcini, we think of his blue pajamas. I'd like to say a word about Aldo Micheli and Mina Poma and Maria Stico as three of the almost originals and very important missionaries whom I was able to know quite intimately. Maria Stico was one of the two originals whom I came to know. The other was Mariucci, who lived in Rome at that time, and was the directress of the little house high up on the Roman hill overlooking the Colosseum, this house that belonged to the Institute, where a few missionaries lived, where missionary visitors to Rome came and stayed, and where the Roman group had its day of recollection. It had a very beautiful chapel with some, I can't think what I want to say, but some artistic things that were left from the first century of Christianity. And because of the chapel and the garden which surrounded it, it was a very famous place for weddings, so that you could count on a wedding almost every weekend. And then all the missionaries had to stay out of the chapel because it was beautifully decorated and given over to these weddings. Mariucci was a very interesting and a very wonderful person. She was not one of the educated missionaries, but she was one of the very holy missionaries. And she was known by many of the uh, high priests and bishops, and even including the Holy Father. It was the Holy Father Pius XII who, through her and through her intercession, really gave um, the this house and the grounds to the Institute. It belonged primarily to the Central Council, and when the two zones were established, it went, uh, it remained with the Central Council. But then the time came when the Central Council thought that it should be given primarily to the Roman group. And so today it does belong to the Roman group, and that is where they have their um, days of recollection. This was all because of the tremendous influence which Mariucci, as a missionary, had with the powers that be within the Catholic Church, really. Now that was a little digression, but to get back to Maria Stico, she was the other original whom I came to know quite well. She was, I should say, almost the exact opposite of Mariucci. She was an intellectual. She was a mystic, very artistic, a beautiful writer. She was a very, very refined person. Uh, she came from Perugia, and she was the sort of person that when you were in her presence, she gave you all the attention in the world. You had a feeling that she probably had at least one foot on the other side, that she was really living in two worlds at the same time. She was the president who followed Armida Borelli. When Armida Borelli died, there was a brief period in which Orsolina Montevecchi, as the vice president, took over as the acting president. But when there was an election, it was Maria Stico who was elected. Maria was not an organizer. She was an artist. But she was able to surround herself with a council that was an organizing body and could take care of all of the works that needed to be done to keep the Institute going. It was at that time that the Holy Father established, no, it wasn't. So I'll skip that for a moment. It was at the time of the next election that this almost happened. Maria Stico was not happy as the president, although she believed that it was what the Lord had asked her to do. As she said, one of the hardest things she ever had to do was to decide whether or not a missionary had, or a young woman had a missionary vocation, and she should say yes to the application or say no. As she said, if it was somebody applying for membership in the country club, I could very easily say yes or no. But when you think of a vocation as a gift given by God, it's hard to say yes, she has one, or no, she does not have one. So that Maria was really delighted when she no longer had to be responsible for saying yes or no. She would have been, when her term of office was over, she would have been willing to accept a second term, but Pius XII said to her, "You are one of the few remaining Christian writers in the country of Italy. Anybody can be a president, but very few can be an author and a Christian author, and so I do not want you to make yourself available." She wrote this to many of the missionaries, and when we came to that General Assembly, we knew that Maria Stico would not be our president again, but that we would elect a new one. It's interesting to think that within 3 weeks of our General Assembly, Pius XII died, and we often have wondered what might have happened had he died 3 weeks before. Would we have had Maria Stico as the president for a second mandate? But that's a question we will never find an answer to. The Maria was a very simple person. Uh, Her little room at Vianecki 2 was sparse. It certainly had what she needed to sleep and to write, and but wasn't profuse with uh, comfortable chairs and lots of little knickknacks and curtains at the window and things like that. It was very sparse and, in a sense, very Franciscan, but there was also a very peaceful atmosphere, and it was always a pleasure to go to visit her. She gave you her undivided attention when you did visit her, and one interesting note about her that I think expresses her poverty of spirit, when she was elected, she was president, she was asked if she was going to continue and be called the Sorella Maggiore as Armida Borelli had been, and she said no, there could only ever be one Armida Borelli, and she would be the Sorella Minore, the little sister. And in many, many ways, she was always our little sister. She was afraid of death. Um, and it's very interesting to note that God gave her her wish that she would die very quietly and very quickly. She had dinner this one evening at Vianecki 2 with some of the other missionaries who lived there. She had her little glass of wine, and then she very peaceably just fell over at the dinner table, and that was it. And it seemed that God understood fully the fear she had, and he was making it as easy for her as he possibly could. When the U.S. zone celebrated its, I keep on calling it a zone, and it wasn't really a zone. Yeah, I guess it was, 1972. When we celebrated our 25th anniversary, we decided that a very fitting way to do this would be to invite Maria Stico to come to the United States. Joyce and I went over to Milan and picked her up and brought her over on the plane and then took her back. And this was the first time she'd ever been in a plane. She was just as thrilled as she could be, and almost like a little girl. I remember that as we were crossing, well, we had just about crossed the ocean, and we were up near Greenland and Newfoundland, and we saw some icebergs. And these, of course, were the first icebergs she had ever seen, and she was utterly delighted. She thought Villa Cortona was one of the most beautiful spots she had ever seen. She felt it was very Franciscan. She enjoyed the squirrels, and she really enjoyed everything that we showed her. One of the places she wanted to see was New York. We couldn't quite see putting her into a New York hotel, so Chris Ravitoy and I, and I'm not sure whether Pierre was with us or not, but we drove up as far as my brother and sister-in-law's in Basking Ridge, New Jersey, and stayed there overnight, and then drove into New York so that she could see the skyscrapers and Rockefeller Center, United Nations, and many of the places that she had read about. When she went back to Italy, she was a very enthusiastic person, and she wanted everybody to be able to come to the United States and stay at Villa Cortona. She was a small woman and a very dainty woman. It was interesting to learn at one time that in 1950, when we went to Italy for the first time and went out to Castel Nuovo Fogliani to meet Father Gemelli, we did not see Maria Stico, although she was there. We did see Orsolina Montevecchi, but we did not see Maria Stico because she had a migraine headache, and they had made her go to bed. A few words now about Alda Micheli. who was our President General for 22 years. This was a fluke, really. As she was completing her first term, her first mandate, the Constitution was revised, and that meant that she had not really served any time. And so when she was elected the next time, it was the very first time. And it just so happened that down through the years, the end of her mandate would coincide with the acceptance and the approval of a new constitution, and so things started over again. Alda was a tremendous president. She had great vision. She saw that it was time for the Institute to go international. She couldn't, or she had a difficult time, I should say, convincing her council that this was true. And at one of the elections, the assembly being held at Laverna, she made the statement before the council was elected that this was the time for the council to go international, and she hoped to see someone non-Italian on that council. Well, when the votes were counted, there was nobody who was not an Italian on the council, and she was visibly very angry. She said she would use her prerogative as the President General, and she would appoint a member to the council. Now, this member would not have the right to vote, nor really the right to speak. That was never strictly enforced, I guess, but certainly the right to vote, the right not to vote was enforced. And then she said something, and I didn't get it at all. And the French friar from Canada, who was the friar founder of the Institute in Japan, said to me, "Barbara, stand up." And that's when I discovered that I was the person, a non-Italian, who was named to the Central Council. It was an interesting experience, because once they had someone who wasn't Italian, they were very pleased with the idea that now they were international, but they really didn't know what to do with me. And I always felt like I was Exhibit A under glass. They were always so very cordial, and I learned a lot about the Institute. I learned so much about the Italians and their temperament, and I learned how to work with the Italians during this period. Alda was a very fine person to work with. She had her own managerial style, and one great difference between the Italians and the Americans, particularly back in that period, was that you always ended up agreeing with the president. That was just a taken for granted thing. And Alda would give everyone on the council an opportunity to speak. And then she would say, "And now we will do it this way." And everybody agreed, and we did it that way. It was interesting to see. And when Sue Ann Rice served on the council, she and I disagreed many times about things. And it was one time, one of the Italian missionaries said to her, "How can you disagree with Barbara? Barbara is older than you are. You owe her that respect. She also has a higher position than you do, and you owe her that respect." And they were constantly surprised to see us really on two sides of a question, and then all of a sudden we would walk out of the room as the best of friends. But we felt that was our American approach to things. Alda came from a very wealthy, titled family in Calabria, which is in southern Italy. She was one of these people who had their own little chapel in their home, and the priest came there to offer Mass each day. And she was a very knowing person and a very empathetic person, and that was part of her southern Italian nature. She was not a good-looking woman, but I must say she had the most beautiful legs. And when I saw her walk across the room, it was fascinating to see the grace in each step. She really understood the the vocation to consecrated secularity. After she got her PhD, she had worked almost entirely in one or the other branches of Catholic action. She was one of the people chosen by Armida Borelli to um, succeed her as the president of the Feminine Youth. And many of the missionaries whom I knew back in the earlier days had come to know the Institute in and through Alda Micheli, and she was always their president. It was a beautiful thing to see. She had a lovely voice, and she liked to sing. She had the good humor and the vivacity of the Southern Italian. And to see her go from table to table in the dining room and to sing with the people there, you could tell, obviously, she enjoyed it. And once again, I say it was a beautiful experience. She was a very hospitable person. I never went to Rome that I was not invited to her home for dinner. And she and Cardinal Antonelli were the two people who had missionaries as housekeepers and cooks. And boy, could they cook. I really forget the name of the woman who came as a very young woman to take care of Alda's household. Alda shared a very beautiful apartment with another missionary, Yolanda Palazzolo. And the link there is that one of the first Australian missionaries who went and immigrated from Italy to Australia was her family was a very good friend of Yolanda Palazzolo's family. So there was quite a little link there. Yolanda was a great worker, and she could keep everything very well organized. Alda was not too well organized, but she knew how to get other people to do the organization. And it was always interesting to go to her apartment and really to come to know the great friendships that existed between herself and the popes of whatever time. And she took it all so simply. She put on no airs. There was one time when she was appointed by the Holy Father to a very important position. And one of the missionaries said to her, "Now you'll have to get some new clothes, won't you?" And she said, "No, I won't." She said, "What I am asked to do, I can do with the clothes I have." And she didn't get any new clothes. She was appointed one of the auditors to the Second Vatican Council, and her appointment was to represent all secular institutes. Well, she was in the Holy Land at that time making a retreat, and it came out in the Roman papers that she was the president of the Secular Institute of Missionaries of the Kingship of Christ. And that was the first time that anything had come out so publicly about the Institute. Several of her friends met her at the airport so they could warn her when she returned home. And she just looked at them and said, "So?" And that was the end of that. It was one of the first breaks for the women of Italy to come to know who was part of this institute. And I guess there was nothing really too serious about that. But she was not, well, she was a lady. She did not have to do housework. But she certainly knew how to have a beautiful home. And as I say, was a very great hostess and a very hospitable person. Let's see, what else can I tell you about her? Armida Borelli was the author of La Nostra Storia, the first volume. But it was really Alda Micheli who was the author of the second volume, La Nostra Storia Continua. Her ability to understand what was going on and the vision that she had uh, was a very great gift which she shared with the entire institute. Do that. Yeah. I felt that Alda was a very good friend of mine. I always knew that she was my superior, and we had many serious talks. But I could open to Alda in a very, very personal way, and I appreciated the many insights which she shared with me during the year. When she died very, very recently, I felt that I had lost not only a missionary sister, but a very good and understanding friend. One thing we shared, and that was our love of shopping. When she came to America for the first time, and I took them up to the United Nations, she didn't see anything of the United Nations except the gift shop. She spent the entire time in the gift shop and buying for all her friends and relatives back in Italy. One of her young nieces became a missionary, and she too was a very simple person, a very humble person, and I never once heard her make any reference to Alda as her aunt, and therefore tried to ride on the coattails of this aunt.